Hello my friends, and welcome back. Today the game plan's pretty simple. We're going to do two videos, one spotlighting Drazhoath the Ashen, commander of the Legion of Asgore, and the new campaign information there, and a few hours later, we're going to talk about Ulrika Magdova and the free LC situation, because there's some more details to share on that front as well. It's going to be a very busy week. I'm working on another Units of Warhammer video with Invicta that should drop sometime in early April. If you saw our Skullcrushers, Skyfleet of Cathay, or Tutigan Guard videos, they're really high quality. I definitely recommend go checking them out. This will be along those same lines. There's more Chaos Dwarf news to cover as well. Darktide is getting an update with a bunch of new weapons, and I'll be covering the patch notes there. And the Tower of Treachery for Vermintide 2 was announced, so there will be content on that front too. Getting pretty wild here, but for right now, the focus is on the second of three legendary lords, and my personal favorite of the bunch, Drazhoath the Ashen. So, in the spirit of letting the oil flow and unleashing our Zardukar crusade upon the galaxy, let's get it poppin'. Number one, we've got a better picture on how the narrative campaign in Realms of Chaos will come together in terms of your objectives as the Dawi Zar, or Uzkul Drath Zar, as they are more formally known. Industrial might is at the core of their strength as an empire. I think the trailer does a good job conveying that message. More steampunk and technologically advanced than just about any other race in the setting. And to power their war machines, their weaponry, their forges, and their methods of transportation, they need raw materials. They need oil. Lots of it. So in the name of spreading democracy and free thinking, and on the 20-year anniversary of our illegal and obscene war in the Middle East, the Chaos Dwarfs will bomb their neighbors into submission, gaslight them into thinking forced labor is good for the soul, and then steal all their raw materials. All in the name of democracy, of course. Blood of Hashut is the name of the game here, which people have been calling oil, and while it does appear that oil is a big part of that, it's not the entire endgame, and it's not all that Blood of Hashut is. If you look at the definition, this so-called Blood of Hashut is a powerful alchemical substance saturated with demonic magic that ignites metal on contact, bursting into molten flame. Although precious beyond mere gold, demon smiths and sorcerer prophets sometimes carry a vial of this liquid into combat to the devastation of their most heavily armored foes. So it's not just oil, it's infused with something a bit spicier, a bit deadlier, and it's the stuff that keeps those iron demons churning and burning long into the night. In the Realms of Chaos campaign, presumably not in Immortal Empires, which tends to have more generic objectives, because you're just conquering the map, doesn't have so much narrative on that side, the Chaos Dwarfs will build this great drill of Hashut by collecting and corrupting 4 sacred Dawi artifacts. They intend to bind demons to each, forging them into separate components that will come together to form this great drill, and once completed, rip open the fabric of reality itself and breach the domain of Hashut, which sounds a lot like they're considering turning against their deity. They wish to no longer deal with the negative side effects of casting spells in his name, such as the long and painful process of petrification, as each sorcerer prophet slowly turns to stone the more they cast. Kind of an interesting mirror of the original objectives for Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle at the launch of Warhammer 3, to enter the Realms of Chaos, but this time to potentially overthrow their father in darkness and drain him of all his blood and power. For a greedy, despicable race like the Chaos Dwarfs, this actually makes a lot of sense. What is the best way to maintain and gain control of power for all eternity? Take it from the god that gives you your power. Power that will then quite literally be transferred back into their own empire. That's how I interpret this all, anyway. They're no longer sated by the morsels Hashut has given them over the years. They want it all now, and they might just kill their god to get it. In the final battle, because Hashut doesn't really have armies of lesser demons in his employ like Bloodletters or Demonettes of Slaanesh, at least ones that aren't bound to constructs and forges by the Chaos Dwarfs themselves, will be against the Kharaz Angkor, a united dwarf empire who comes for you, super pissed off that you're corrupting symbols of their ancestor gods. Now, this narrative sounds silly and super over the top, don't get me wrong. It's definitely not as grounded or reflective of established lore as the Zanbai Jin campaign was for the Champions of Chaos, for example, but it's not without precedence either. Traversing rifts into the realms of the gods, especially for mortal races like Kislev and Cathay, was always ridiculous. There was, I wouldn't call it backlash, but there was grumbling about that when that was first announced. And a Skaven rocket reaching escape velocity and cosplaying as the twin-tailed comet of Sotek and Sigmar as it orbits the planet in outer space was also kind of laughed at, and yeah, it is crazy, it is over the top. If I read it in a Black Library novel, I might roll my eyes, but in a visual medium like video games, for some reason I feel like it works a bit better, and I've always kind of treated these as what-if scenarios anyway, because the story changes depending on who you play and the decisions you make in your campaigns, and that's always been the appeal of Total War. So even if it doesn't make the perfect logical sense from a narrative perspective, it is a fun what-if scenario. Certainly gives you something to work towards, and I think this will be a fitting conclusion to the Chaos Dwarf campaign. So, as dumb as ripping through reality with a giant drill actually is, I still kind of like it. It sounds fun. I just wouldn't really consider it canon either. As for Drazhoath himself, we've talked a lot about him and his motivations, his rivalry with Astragoth Ironhand, his banishment to the Black Fortress, his Baal Taurus Cinderbreath, and the unique power he will have as a flying caster and fearsome melee combatant. That is to say nothing of the troops under his command and what he plans to unleash with them. Naturally, that will be up to you, the player, but his unique buffs will help inform some of those decisions. For one, he is the best Chaos Dwarf Lord for generating armaments and developing settlements, being described as an industrial juggernaut. This is for one major reason. He will be able to easily establish control over two of the three most important locations in the Darklands besides Zarnagrund itself. The Black Fortress, which will be his starting location, and the Tower of Gorgoth directly to his west. This gives him two distinct and powerful advantages over his rivals. Number one, he has control over the Infernal Guard, Infernal Ironsworn, and the whole of the Legion of Asgore, strongest army not currently residing in the capital, and he has access to foundries that specialize in the production of arms, armor, and the creation of Kadai, which are going to be really important elements of this roster, and we'll highlight them in just a second. These twin towers, the Tower of Gorgoth and the Black Fortress, very much reflect the might of Mordor and Isengard in Middle-earth. They even kind of look like them, and form the heartland of a Splendor Kingdom that has the potential to rival or even overthrow the High Priest of Hasha in Astragoth Ironhand and the capital city of Zarnagrund, if they decided to go that route. The Tower of Gorgoth lies directly north of Imric of Calador and the Fortress of Vorag, serving as a slave labor camp and mine, from which deep deposits of ore are hewn from rock to further the war effort, and it is also a center for the production of demon engines, where the pain train of the Dawizar truly begins its locomotion. They'll have access to the Hellforge, which is where you will be able to raise your unit caps to field more Chaos Dwarfs and fiery constructs, but you'll have to pay armaments to do so, and it is also where you will spend those armaments to craft unique weapons and armor for your characters, and presumably give your units upgrades too. So basically a combination of Ikit's Lab, Throt's Flesh Pits, and the Dwarf Forge. Doesn't seem to be breaking a ton of new ground here in terms of the campaign mechanics themselves, just taking elements from other races that work really well and giving it some Hellforged Dawizar flavor, which I can't truly disagree with because all the mechanics unveiled thus far fit right at home in this faction, from the caravan trading to the slave mechanics and pretty much everything in between. With that said, I don't believe any of the three Chaos Dwarf Legendary Lords have unique mechanics of their own, which I know was a sticking point for some of you, and there may be some grumbling about that one too. They clearly have a lot of mechanics, easily more than most of the races in the setting, if not the most, but from a pure campaign perspective, I don't think there's anything specific to Drazhoath or Astragoth like the Forge of Daith or Grom's Cauldron, something specific to that lord. Obviously, start positions, unit buffs, mounts, combat performance, and beginning armies will differentiate them quite a bit throughout the other elements of your playthrough. The big departure overall, of course, is the Conclave of Sorcerers, which could get especially spicy as you dive further into the tower and acquire the higher level seats to supercharge your economy or military. We've seen some of the buffs thus far. A lot of them seem pretty decent, but I would be willing to bet near the top they get pretty cracked, so looking forward to seeing those. Now, when it comes to the Legion of Asgore, I have some details to share. I have confirmation that Infernal Ironsworn are not a regiment of renown for the regular Infernal Guard. They are their own standard troop choice, which you will be able to field multiple units of. The Regiment of Renown instead comes in the form of the Immortals, in the skull masks and tall hats in the black, who are in turn an improved version of Ironsworn. So, sounds like you'll be able to field as many Ironsworn as the unit caps allow, and you'll be able to raise those caps through the Forge, but there will only ever be one regiment of Immortals. As we take a look at this image, Infernal Guard with great weapons are on the left, Axe and Shield Infernal Guard are right next to them, Infernal Ironsworn to the right of them, Infernal Guard with Fire Glaives, probably going to be an amazing unit and a staple of your faction, being able to shoot armor-piercing bright volleys from downtown, then engage large stuff in melee with armor-piercing halberds. Very, very good. Basically, Thunderers that are better in melee. Like, that's amazing. A Regiment of Renown upgrade to Chaos Dwarf Blunderbusses, and the Immortals with the dual axes, and one of the pimpest outfits I've ever seen in my entire life. My lord, look at that drip. They look sick. But let's talk about the Kadai for a second, because this is the roster element that has received maybe the least attention thus far, and I'd argue it's one of the coolest ones. These are mighty demonic fire elementals, enslaved to the will of the sorcerer caste, and bound to iron rot constructs. Their blazing bodies increase their own physical resistance, while reflecting damage back towards their attackers. This builds and builds while engaged in melee, so they will likely become stronger the longer they fight. But there's a balance to be struck here, because once their leadership and HP drops below a certain threshold, they lose their unbreakable attribute and begin crumbling like regular demons, which is a really cool mechanic. Their special armor and traits provides them with powerful buffs to start, but once enough damage has been accrued and the runes that bind them start breaking down or broken by enemy melee weapons, they lose those traits and become much easier to deal with. Fluffy and thematic choices all across the board there, like it a lot. That's to say nothing of the flaming dual axes that will give them bonus first foot troops and high mobility as monstrous infantry. Absolutely gorgeous models on them too, they look amazing. As for the Kadai Destroyer, the centerpiece monster unit of the entire DLC, it is AP, anti-large, huge health pool, and has the wall breaker trait. So while it may not be eminently doom stackable because of unit caps, expect a cross between a Khemrian War Sphinx and a Necro Sphinx, but ideally better combat performance than either one. Super damaging, gonna hit incredibly hard, massive size, and a ton of armor. So we already know Hyrule Titans and other stuff with a lot of armor still die relatively quickly to focus fire from archers, but the armor should at least help on that front. Maybe some missile resist to help on that front too. Gonna be hard to bring down in melee for sure. Good for clearing hordes of armored infantry, but best used for taking on Shaggus and dragons and other heavily clad beastie boys. When they land, when they close into a CQB with this thing, it's gonna hit really hard. So for Drazhoath, utilizing a pure selection of Lore of Hashut spells, your job will be to consolidate the Southern Darklands, get the Black Fortress and Tower of Gorgoth under your control as fast as you can, get stacks of Infernal Guard built up and dominating, then deal with Emmerich, the Greenskins, and Dwarfs to your west, and Greasis, Kugath, and Helmengorst to your east. With the extra armaments and quicker building of towers, I imagine this economy can get pretty wild when managed well, and I cannot wait to see that in action. So, hope you guys enjoyed that look at the second of 3 lords coming in the Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs DLC. Later on today, we'll be covering Ulrika Magdova and the topics of Free LC, and then Darktide, Vermintide, and more Total War content hot on her heels. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.